Well, Monday, November the 10th, marks the start of the 30th United Nations Climate Change Conference, otherwise known as the COP30. It's taking place this year in Belém, Brazil. Now, ahead of the start of that gathering, some 50 world leaders and stakeholders are meeting today, on Thursday, and Friday as well, under the Brazilian president's leadership for a preview of sorts on this year's objectives. Coming 3 decades after the world's first ever climate conference and 10 years after the landmark Paris Climate Agreement, this year's gathering is less aimed at setting new goals than it is at ensuring that the international community respects existing ones. Here's the Brazilian president earlier.
To advance, we need to overcome 2 mismatches. The first mismatch is the lack of connection between the diplomatic saloons and the actual world. People cannot understand what are emissions or metric tons of carbon. Maybe they can't manage to assimilate the meaning of the increase of 1.5 degrees of the global temperature, but they suffer the drought, floods, and hurricanes. The second mismatch is the decoupling between the geopolitical context and the climate urgencies. Extremist forces fabricate fake news and to obtain electoral gains and imprison future generations of a model that should be overcome.
Well, France 24's international affairs editor Angela Diffley joins me now on set for more analysis of this climate summit. Hi, Angela. So, like I said, this is the 30th annual UN Climate Conference. What is the focus this time around?
Well, also, as you said, Erin, this is very much the focus is trying to be on implementation rather than great new pledges. That said, there are 2 key ideas that Lula da Silva is pushing. One of them is this idea of an adaptation fund, which would encourage the private sector to pledge money for each amount the private sector pledges, then governments would also chip in order to help tropical forest countries who are committing to try to preserve their rainforest, but to help them alleviate the consequences of doing that. But of course, because of course much of their economies, these countries, is based on logging or a commercial use of the rainforests, and so they need some sort of compensation for that. So he's really trying to get money for that adaptation fund. The other is the Forever Forest. Sorry, that is the Forever Forest Fund. The other one is the Adaptation Fund, which is very much about pledging money to countries who are simply having to spend an awful lot of money to try to build defences against rising sea levels and all the climate emergencies that we see, the climate change, extreme weather events, which have such an impact on those countries, particularly island communities, who, as we have been hearing for years now, are under real threat. That said, Lula da Silva has been criticised a lot. He himself recently in Brazil awarded a major contract to Petrobras, license to exploit oil at the mouth of the Amazon River. He says, look, I never said I'm a global climate leader. He, like every other leader, is trying to find some sort of balance between keeping an economy running and looking at the long-term but increasingly more dangerous issues around climate change. So this COP is not one where people expect enormous new pledges. It will be an incremental affair.
Does indeed feel like these conferences are getting less and less ambitious as time goes on. And speaking of that, Angela, there are 3 major absences this year. The U.S. not sending anyone at all, whereas China and India, these countries, of course, being the 3 top polluters in the world, are only sending low-level delegations. So how much of an impact will that have, or how much will that mean that there will be a lack of an impact on this summit?
Yeah, it's certainly true that once Donald Trump is not there, that really takes the heat off India, which is even less of a polluter than the US, and China too will feel less pressure if the US isn't turning up. Donald Trump has been absolutely clear. He says that climate change is quite simply a socialist hoax. And whereas before that elicited laughter, and it is increasingly gaining ground, this narrative that too much has been made of climate change. Even Bill Gates recently, just last week, said that the United Nations should stop with the doomsday view of climate change and concentrate its energies instead on vaccines and trying to alleviate world poverty. Those two are, of course, linked, but he is a thoughtful man who knows a lot about problems in the world, and his input has also had some kind of impact. It shouldn't be forgotten that even though the United States are not going to be at this COP summit, they will be influencing behind the scenes. And quite recently, there was a major accord on trying to reduce the polluting impact of the world shipping industry. The United States pulled out all the stops to pressure other countries so that nothing of any significance was agreed and so that no carbon levies were agreed. And the United States was afterwards accused by some countries of using bully boy tactics. We know that Donald Trump, he uses tariffs, he weaponizes tariffs. The United States is very willing to throw its weight about, and behind the scenes, it will be perhaps with allied petro-states very keen to make sure that this summit doesn't come up with anything very useful in terms of curbing climate change.